Tonight, we're going to talk about casual versus competitive when it comes to tabletop wargaming. And I mentioned this earlier in the live stream, but what prompted this was all of the kerfuffle, shall we say, about the leagues of Votann and about how they weren't particularly very balanced. We all know what happened with that. I did a video about it a couple of weeks ago that you can see up here. I'll put it in a link above. What did come out of that discussion was there were a lot of people complaining about competitive gamers, saying competitive gamers are ruining the game. It's always got to be balanced. Why does it have to be sort of so fine-tunedly balanced? There were competitive gamers complaining about casual players, saying, well, I don't even know what you're whinging about kind of thing. It doesn't really matter. And there ended up being this kind of, not an argument, shall we say, but a bit of friction online about competitive versus casual gamers. I wanted to chat tonight and say about, does it even matter? Is it important? Does it really matter whether you're a casual or a competitive gamer? And I think one of the things that we need to start with really is to kind of define what do I mean by competitive and casual gamers, because there are not just two types of gamer. There is a whole spectrum of types of gamer, and I think we sometimes forget that a little bit. So what do I mean by a casual gamer? A casual gamer, for me, is somebody who just likes to play for a bit of fun. Winning is probably not the main reason why they play games. They might still be quite competitive. They might still want to win more games than they lose. But generally, they're playing just to have fun and to kind of play with other players. Like I say, winning is maybe not their kind of number one priority. It might be, I spent a lot of time painting these miniatures. I'm a painter, really. I love painting miniatures. I've painted all these minis and I want to be able to put them on the tabletop and be able to play. And I find that's probably more what your casual player is about. They won't be trying to kind of construct the most competitive lists. They won't necessarily be doing really kind of sort of like cheesy armies. They are probably playing with the rule of cool in mind and playing with the minis that they like the look of, as opposed to the ones that are the best in the game. That's how I would generally sort of call a casual player. A competitive player, on the other hand, I would say is probably somebody who is, and don't take this the wrong way, but it's almost somebody who is trying to win the game before they've even rolled the dice. What they're trying to do is they're trying to build the most competitive list to try and take into account what they might come up against on the tabletop. So if they know they've got a weakness in their army's not very fast, they'll be trying to put things into their lists, into their armies to counteract that. Maybe they know they're going to kind of face lots of shooty armies, so they're going to put things into their list to try and counteract that. They get a lot of fun and a lot of enjoyment from the list building aspect and about trying to build a list that then goes on to win games. So there's an element of almost trying to win the game before they've even played. They are obviously very much tournament players, but the main aim generally for a competitive player is to win the game. They still want to have fun. They have fun in a different way. They have fun by winning the games. They have fun by having a hard-fought match. But generally, I would say, and this is a generalization, winning is their main aim. Now, there is, as I said before, there's not just two types of gamer. We also have tournament gamers. So I wouldn't necessarily say tournament gamers and competitive gamers are the same thing. Tournament gamers are sometimes people who are literally just, everything they live for is going to tournaments. Every game they play is a tournament practice game. I think that's almost like different to a competitive player. You can get a competitive player who never goes to a tournament. They just want to play at their local club against other people who will give them like a kind of like a tough game, if you like, and they want to try and win games. They might play like a little league thing with like a few friends, but winning is the most important thing. Tournament gamers are gamers who like going to tournaments, trying to win more games than they lose, trying to win the tournaments. That's their kind of thing. We also get narrative gamers. Narrative gamers are not the same as casual gamers. Narrative gamers want to recreate stories. They're quite happy to have completely unbalanced games where one army might be half the size of the other one because it recreates something from a book that they've read, or maybe they're playing Lord of the Rings and it recreates something from the films. So like sort of narrative gamers are different to casual again. Balance is probably less important to them. They're probably not even bothered about the stats. It's the spectacle of having like a beautiful table with all of the terrain and like building this list that really kind of like mirrors something that they've read about or they've watched a movie on. So we get narrative gamers. We then get something called kind of fluffy gamers. And fluffy gamers are not necessarily narrative gamers. Fluffy gamers are people who like to kind of build a bit of a, what you would call a fluff list. Something where they're building a list. They might even take it to a tournament, but they're building a list that recreates something from, say, a Horus Heresy book or something. Or maybe they're building a list for Marvel Crisis Protocol that mirrors something that they've seen in an Avengers film. It's a very thematic and fluffy list, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they don't intend to win. It just means that there's a different motivation in how they're building their list. We get people who build cheesy or broken lists. These are people who try to exploit every facet of a codex or of an army, like kind of like stat line, where they know they can spam certain units because the rules allow that, and that'll make it very, very powerful. Like people who intentionally try and kind of find the loopholes and find the kind of like the little broken bits that the player testers never picked up on. Like even they are players who very kind of competitive tournament players might not want to play against because they've really kind of exploited the game for everything it's worth. So that they're different again. Then you get people who like to build meta lists. Meta lists are essentially people who build lists to try and counteract what they see as is popular in the tournament scene. More so these days with the internet. Like when I first started gaming, people only really knew about the kind of lists that the people in their local tournament or in their local gaming clubs played. And if something was successful, people would try and build a list. Either they would build that list or they would try and build a list to beat that list. These days, with kind of like all of the information that we have online, we see how powerful certain lists are. We see how powerful certain armies or certain factions are. And that's what creates a bit of a global meta because people start copying what they've seen online. So when it comes to competitive versus casual, as I mentioned before, there's not just two types of gamer. There are many, many different types of gamer. And the issue with this is that when two players come to play a game together and they have different expectations. They're looking for something different from the game. So if you've got somebody who's a very thematic gamer and they've spent ages painting this beautiful army that recreates this kind of certain battle from a Horus Heresy book, and they come up against somebody who is really a win at all costs, that they get their fun from just being as efficient as possible, building that kind of cheesy list, if you like, exploiting the rules to get the most kind of efficient build. Those two people are coming to that game with very different expectations. And that's where we kind of get into the problem. Now, one of the issues we have is we're not a massive kind of crowd of people. I've spoken before on live streams and videos about that. I think there are a lot less people actually physically play the games than people really think that there are. Majority of people are hobbyists who might play the odd game. And so when you've got a relatively small pool of people who play games, and then that pool of gamers is then made up of all the different types of gamers that I've just talked about, getting two of those people with similar expectations to match up is much harder than it should be, really. You could say that, well, people who go to tournaments are all looking for like really competitive games. But actually, even that's not true. Like I go to lots of tournaments, or I have done in the past, and my motivation isn't the kind of to win every single game I play. My motivation is to go and to have fun and to play against people I've never played against before, and play against armies I've never played against before, and have a few beers on the evening and have a bit of a laugh and some nice food and catch up with some old friends. So my motivations for going to tournaments is very different to other people. I do know that going to a tournament, I will potentially come up against people who are going to try and win every game and come first and try and kind of sort of not smash me off the table, if you like. But I go into that with that expectation and understanding that there's a chance that not everybody will be kind of as relaxed as I am about it. But it's that mismatch of people. And I think that as long as you are communicating with the people that you are playing against, then there's not really a problem with casual versus competitive, it's not really an issue. It shouldn't be a problem, because as long as the two people playing each other at least speak to each other beforehand and have an understanding. Like, it might be somebody that is really into their competitive gaming, but their friend says, look, I've just put together this really cool list from this book I've read. I know you've got the other army. Do you fancy putting something together and we'll have a bit of a narrative game? And they might go, yeah, that's absolutely fine, because they've agreed in advance and they both have the same expectations. It's when there are mixed expectations or mismatched expectations that somebody tends to have a not very fun experience. There's also a little bit that kind of gets talked about online as well, about elitism when it comes to kind of competitive versus casual. Sometimes there's a little bit of, and I don't know whether it's justified, I don't know whether it's just kind of like chat that I hear now and again, but almost as if you're not playing competitive, don't complain about the balance of data slates and this kind of thing. Don't complain about the balance of army lists. Because if you're not playing competitively, what does it matter, kind of thing. So we do sometimes get that a little bit of kind of niggle and a little bit of elitism in there. I think it's a bit of a myth that people who play casually or play thematically or like kind of like narratively or fluffy, I think it's a bit of a myth that they don't want their games to be balanced as well. They don't have to be balanced, because they're not like, their main aim is not necessarily to win a game. But they want to feel like they're having a bit, at least like a fair crack of the whip, if you like. They want to feel like they're not being beaten purely by the fact that the game is unbalanced, as opposed to, like, if I'm taking a 500-point army and you're taking a 2,000-point army, and maybe my aim in this narrative mission is to be able to defend something for 2 turns or something. Of course, it's going to be lopsided, but you then don't want the added sort of pressure to the game of the fact that the armies are completely mismatched, even if they had the same number of points. So even people who play narrative games and who play kind of casual games or fluffy games, they still want an element of fairness, shall we say. Balance is maybe not the right word, but they want an element of fairness. They want an element of, at least I'm kind of in with a bit of a chance here. And I think that there's this expectation that competitive gaming drives the way games are written. It drives the way games go. It certainly drives the fact that we get more points updates more often, and that comes from the fact that people like Games Workshop, they do their Meta Watch videos, and they've been talking about how they look at all of the different competitive gaming that goes on around the globe, and they take that data to adjust kind of the points for different armies to adjust their win rates, and they're trying to balance them that way. This means that there's a constant churn, if you like, on a sometimes monthly basis, of the way it feels like, of constant points updates and things shifting. Now, if you're a casual gamer, you're a fluffy gamer, you're a narrative gamer, there's a lot of people out there don't even bother keeping up to date with all of the points changes. I know people who say, look, I only play the codex points. I don't care if things change down the line. I'm not that fussed about it. I'm not even trying to win games. I just play with what's in the codex. But again, it comes down to mismatches. If you go into your club every week, if you like, and you're playing with folks who keep up with the latest point changes, you kind of have to keep up with the latest point changes as well. It's also drives this competitive versus casual thing, as in this always constant need to buy everything as well. There's always this feeling that competitive gamers are always that, you know, they're always buying the latest thing because it's always a little bit kind of overpowered, and it's constantly driving this, and like they jump on the latest army. I think that's a bit of a myth as well. We talked about this recently as well. That it takes quite a long time to plan, to build, to pay for sometimes, to paint an army. And most competitive events, you have to have a fully painted army. So I think it's a bit of a myth that people are constantly buying a new army for every event, trying to sort of chase the meta and trying to have the latest, greatest thing. There are people out there who do that. I've met people like that. They're the kind of people who manage to paint an army in a weekend and they have the latest thing for every event they go to, and they sell their old one and all that kind of stuff. There are people out there like that. But I think that's a minority versus the majority of people who are kind of like competitive gamers. I think one of the things I've been talking about there as well is about communication and finding like-minded people. And actually that can be a lot tougher than you might think. I've gone to local clubs where I've played against some really nice guys. I can't speak highly enough about the people I've played against. As people, as guys, they've been great to play games with. However, they are very much competitive players. They go to a lot of tournaments. They go away to lots of games, to like lots of events. And every time they play, they are playing their latest kind of tournament competitive list to practice for when they go away again. They're very much tournament players. They are very much into the nitty-gritty of the rules and into understanding combinations and understanding the latest kind of tricks and tips. And whilst I've had some fun games against those guys, it tends to drive me away in the long run, because I get to a point where it's like, look, I don't play that frequently. I don't spend all week reading the rules and keeping up with the latest stuff. I just want to put some models on a table and roll some dice and have a bit of a laugh. And it ends up driving me away a little bit. And again, that's not because of the people. It's just because of the kind of, we're looking for different things when it comes to the games that we play. So it's not always that easy to find kind of like-minded people. I think there's also the kind of thing that competitive sort of, as we were talking about before with the constant moving lists and stuff, competitive gaming by design can often drive away more casual players because of exactly the thing I've just been talking about as well. I think the kind of what I would say is to start to wrap this up is that basically there are no wrong ways to play. If you're somebody that enjoys fine-tuning the latest kind of math hammer lists and you get enjoyment and fun from that, all power to you. You knock yourself out. If you're somebody that really enjoys building those thematic lists and enjoys painting them up and making them look like this maybe something from a story or a movie that you've seen, fantastic. You're enjoying your hobby as well. There is no wrong way to play and there's no one way to play. The problem comes is when people's expectations, people's sort of way of having fun don't line up, and that's really the problem. Mismatched games is where we start to get into this issue. There's no problem with competitive play, there's no problem with casual play. We need both of those things. It's just when the two of them clash together, that's when we seem to get the issue. After all, having fun is the ultimate aim, and if you're having fun, then you're doing it the right way. I'd love to know what you think. Let me know down in the comments, and I'll see you in the next video.